from the Ticats Audio Network. This is the CFL This Week with Bubba O'Neil.
This is finally it. The preseason prognostications that were a hot topic in the middle of May have all played out and will soon be left with a 6-team scrap for the Grey Cup. Before that, there's just one final week to be played, and even the teams that have clinched their playoff positions have questions, many questions. This is the CFL This Week on the Ticats Audio Network. I'm your host, Bubba O'Neil. So pleased that you've been on this up and down 21-week ride of debate discussion regarding the CFL's regular season. On this week's pod, some of the best from the three-down world from the province of Manitoba. He is the sports columnist at the Winnipeg Free Press and the CFL Reporters President, Mr. Jeff Hamilton. Thanks for joining us.
Bubba, great to be on here, my friend. It's good to be back and looking forward to chopping it up with the guys.
Right on. Hey, he's one of the young and up-and-comers who's actually arrived calling games on the CFL on TSN. Marshall Ferguson, always appreciate your time.
Good to be on with you, Bubba. Looking forward to it.
And if you want anything to do with Winnipeg sports, he can do it, whether it's the sidelines, in the booth, or hosting a show. Joey Slattery, thank you so much for your time.
Always love coming on, Bubba. Looking forward to this.
You're right on. Okay, guys, let's get right to it because it's just so intriguing on this final week of the regular season. I'm going to ask you, Marsh, you start with the first question because you are a guy that has called many Redblacks games, and I'm going to ask you straight up, who is this team? Are they the team, when you look back to last week's loss to the Argonauts, that were down 38-6 through three quarters versus the Argonauts, or the team that's outscored Toronto 25-0 in the final quarter? Who are these guys?
It's a great question. By the way, this was a fun learning experience for me, which was I didn't get a chance to watch the game because I went on a little road trip through the States after I was done doing the Tiger Cats game this past Friday night against Calgary. And when I got back to Canada, I have a friend who went to the game in Toronto. And I'm like, oh, yeah, I heard that Toronto won. He's like, yeah, he's a Redblacks season ticket holder. He made the drive in from Belleville, Ontario, and he just goes, do you have any idea how many points Ottawa gave up to begin this football game? I'm like, no, I don't even know what happened. I haven't seen the highlights or anything. And he told me, I'm like, come on. I'm like, so you're telling me Bo did that to his old team on Friday night in a blowout in the first half, and then we ended up doubling down on that on the Saturday game in the East Division? I was like, man. So it was weird to find out exactly how this happened. But I was concerned about Ottawa. You know how you can always kind of you see the results, but you aren't sure if they really match up with, I don't want to say the process, because I'm sure Bob Dice in that building is doing everything he can to get the most out of that team. But when I looked at some of the statistics every week when I'm putting it together, very similar to Toronto when they had Cam Dukes and they're 2-0 and everyone's losing their mind. I'm like, this feels a little fraudulent. I'm like, this team isn't going to, I think, have like a 750 win percentage on the season, the Argonauts. And when I watched Ottawa partway through, whether it was Drew Brown or Jeremiah Masoli, just kind of felt like, man, they're not really finishing in the score zone. They've got some turnover issues. The penalties are starting to pile up as the weeks go on. And as I started to piece that together, I actually, I'm not the greatest prognosticator by any standard, but I do remember saying to somebody about halfway through the season, I'm like, this feels like this might be like a really, really great season. Everyone gets excited. We have a home playoff game in Ottawa, and then they lose the home playoff game. I'm like, oh, man, that would be a horrific ending to this for them to finally get back in the playoffs and lose it. Turns out they're not even getting a home playoff game because they actually ended up going early with a bit of that collapse. So I think they are the team that we saw in the first half of that game. I really do. I think that they have issues that really haven't been addressed at various points throughout the season, and they are doing everything they can to extract the best out of that club. But it's been a really, really downhill second half. If you go back and watch some games from their first half of the season and you compare and contrast to what we've seen over the last 6 weeks, it doesn't even look like the same team.
Joey, are you as confused as I am?
Yes, I want to say they're somewhere in the middle, because I think when you're putting up 25 points in a quarter after what you just went through for three quarters, I mean, there's something to be said about that too. Now, yeah, I think Toronto took their foot off the gas a little bit, but at the end of the day, there were some bright spots with Ottawa. It does seem like when Drew Brown has the time, when the offensive line is sharp and he's getting that extra second to get that pass off, he's making some good plays. I mean, he made some good plays even when they were getting pumped in the first half, but it just seemed like Toronto had so many holes, right? Or when I say holes, I mean provided by the Ottawa defense. It just seemed like the receivers were finding wide open spots and getting a lot of yak yards afterwards, because it seemed like anything Ottawa was doing, Toronto was a step ahead all game up until that fourth quarter. But then there were those 2 special teams plays too. So there's some bright spots. I mean, when you're forcing a fumble on Janarian Grant on the return and then getting the onside kick and giving yourself a chance to win the game, and, to what Marsh said, it's, when you're down that much and then you're within a score going into the last 2 minutes of the game. I mean, you have to give some credit where credit is due. Now, I think we saw the worst of Ottawa in that game, but I think we saw a better Redblacks team in that fourth quarter. Now, I am confused though. Like Marsh said, it kind of seems like they've been getting worse as time goes on. And this is the thing with the CFL. It is a long season, right? And you can have early success, but you have to play the full season. And now you're going into a 1-game scenario. So if you can put that performance against Toronto in the fourth quarter in your in the playoff performance, then you give yourself a chance. But I don't think in a playoff game, if you fall down that hard to open up the game, you're going to come back with a fourth quarter like you did. You have to keep in mind that this was a Toronto team, that everything was going well. The foot came off the gas. And I think it's a reminder for them as well. When you get into the playoffs, you can't have a fourth quarter like that, any quarter like that, because every possession is going to matter that much more. But with the Redblacks, I don't think they're as bad as that first 3 quarters, but I don't think they're a 25-0, team in a fourth quarter either. So it'll be interesting to see how they respond in the playoffs, because they have plenty to look at on the tape, that's for sure.
Jeff, there was kind of a time there, I think midway through the season, it looked like they're going to break their postseason slump, which dates back, I think, to 2018. And I thought they were the best story going in the Canadian Football League. And now I don't even know how long that playoff run is going to last.
Yeah, I mean, if you're wondering which team this club is closer to, the first half or the second half, I don't know how you make an argument to the second half. I just, this is a club that hasn't won since beating the pants off Toronto back on September 7th. We're entering into late October, as Marsh out there in Ontario, you guys out in Hamilton are enjoying that beautiful weather. This, They haven't been able to figure it out since. And so this idea that Ottawa is just going to figure it out, not buying it. I think this is, I think they'll look back on this season and take the positives out of a great start. I do think there's a couple takeaways, particularly out of that game. Khalil Pimpleton just doesn't give up. It didn't matter if it was play 1 or the last play of the game. That guy was going to continue to play for the Redblacks. And I think that you need that kind of effort, that kind of attitude in Ottawa right now if you're going to get out of the East. And the other thing too is Drew Brown, right? I mean, Drew Brown hasn't exactly been the model of consistency behind center this season. He's battled multiple injuries. He hasn't been out there as much as certainly, he wants to be out there and his team wants him to be out there. And so really, they really don't have a chance with Jeremiah Masoli. So Drew Brown's going to have to be playing some of his best football, playing the kind of football we saw in the first half of the season. And if he can do that, the good news is that if you have great quarterback play, you can beat most teams in this league. And so the last thing too in that game for me is that while, I'm not putting too much stock into the comeback. Obviously, you got to give the Redblacks credit for clawing it out, making it a 1-score game in a game that otherwise looked like it was over by halftime. But you're not gonna if you're the Montreal Alouettes. If you're Toronto, you're not running into those onside kicks, as if you're going to separate a shoulder for when the game really matters. It's like, at that point in the game to have to convert 3 onside kicks. And I mean, great work that you did 2 of them, but the last thing I want to do on one of those plays is separate my shoulder in a game that, feels out of reach at that point. So I think it's a good thing for Ottawa in that it gives them some of that mental hurdle. They pass that mental hurdle, because if they get their asses kicked and then go into that East final with that same kind of mentality in that game, they can almost go into that game now with some angst and some confidence, knowing that when they want to turn it on, they can do that. I mean, again, it was under interesting circumstances, kind of the game, out of reach and playing kind of prevent defense. But I do think that does make you feel a bit better if you're Ottawa going to that East final.
I want to mention this too, just for a second, on that September 7th game that was that you mentioned, like the last time that they won. Chad Kelly just threw them the ball 3 times.
Yeah,
right. Like I was calling that game, and we were standing there basically in the booth, Dunnigan and myself, and going, he doesn't know how to throw a wet ball. Like, it's just sliding out the side of his hand, and he's sailing everything 5 feet over his receivers. We're like, I don't know what's up with Chad today, but he doesn't feel comfortable throwing a wet ball, it looks like. And then you start to think about the path that Ottawa has to take. Unless Chad decides to do what he did in the Eastern Final last year, I don't think he's going to throw them the ball the way that he did in that game on September 7th. So you're going to end up having to actually beat them straight up the way that they weren't able to this past week. And I called Ottawa Montreal a couple of weeks after that Toronto victory on September 7th. And I remember we were all hyped up and all excited about it out here in the East and thinking, man, this could be a potential East final matchup. And then they go into that one and the offense is just stagnant. And Montreal's offense didn't look great. And the Alouettes just kind of found a way to win the game. I think they had a pick six in that game as well. But it was like those two games for me were the turning point in the season. Once we hit Labor Day and move forward, it's like they get it done against Toronto, but it feels kind of fraudulent. And then they don't get it done against Montreal at home. And it really set the tone for, okay, there's issues here. But Joey, what do you have to say?
I was going to say, I agree with Jeff too. I don't see this team making a playoff run by any stretch. I'm kind of looking at this team as a team that's building in to years to come, right? And I think the steps that they've taken this year, they put themselves in a position where they're fighting for top spot early on. Things have fell off, but I don't think anybody came into the season as Ottawa's a Grey Cup favorite, right? I think what they've done, and in this game particularly, what I liked was that fight. Like you say, you were talking about Pimpleton, but there was just, the game was over. It was over well before that fourth quarter, and they did not play like that. And that's the things that I like to see in a team that's trying to build up. They're going through their adversity. This is kind of new territory for this era of the Redblacks. So I have to say, in terms of looking forward into next year, there's some takeaways from this team, even when things are going bad, that the effort is there, but there's definitely some polish that needs to be there, and probably some personnel changes on the field as well to make sure that you've got the best players that can complement each other going forward.
Overall, they had a lot of injuries. I will say that they had a tremendous amount of injuries that they had to kind of go through. And some of them are coming back. Joe Van Santos Knox, a middle linebacker, sounds like he could be back. He could be a difference maker and get them maybe a little bit closer to the team that we sort of expected to see, but has been really disappointing. I'm going to start with you, Jeff, because you're the big ring of the reporters who are going to be doing a lot of voting for this. Tiger Cats quarterback Bo Levi Mitchell just went wild last week. It was so fun to watch. 450 yards passing, 5 touchdown passes. He said it was 6 because the Trey Roberson one was an actual touchdown that he should have been credited to. So he says it's a career high 6 touchdown passes. There's been sort of talk about MOP being that guy, at least the East nominee. Do you see that happening with Bo Levi Mitchell, regardless of the Tiger Cats record?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised by it. As you mentioned, I will be voting, but I don't have the deciding vote in it. So we'll have to wait for our peers to see how this plays out. I mean, there's obviously been a ton of talk around Bo Levi Mitchell. I was there a couple weeks back for the game and, playing Winnipeg. And, I was saying all week the hype was real behind him in that previous game, and it was against Edmonton. I forget who it was, but he threw the lights out, and obviously, was leading and continues to lead in several categories. I do get the understanding. I mean, I do get the argument about not being in the playoffs. I don't think it should. I think it should have some weight. I think it shouldn't have. Necessarily vote deciding weight, if you will. You look at his stats, Bubba, and it's pretty clear, man. I mean, he's leading the league. He's leading the league with more than 5. Only quarterback with 5,000 passing yards. He's got 31 touchdowns, which also leads the league. Sorry, he's got 17 interceptions compared to the 31 touchdown passes. He's running a lot more. It's not a career high rushing season for him, but it is for the first time in I think close to a decade that he's eclipsed 100 rushing yards. And the fact of the matter is, if he is in the playoffs and has those kind of stats, he's probably winning the award, and so when you factor in those kind of things, I do think it's also a reality of the season. It reminds me a lot of 2019, where there isn't that quarterback that's really stepped out. There's been a lot of injuries. That was the year, obviously, that Cody Fajardo was nominated and Speedy Banks ended up winning, right? So it was kind of that unorthodox year. So I think it benefits Bo that the East doesn't really have, like a ton of eye-popping candidates. I think Tyrese Beverette in Montreal deserves, obviously some looks. Cody Fajardo, I understood. I mean, it made sense that he was kind of leading the rest of the way here, much of the season in the Vegas odds, if you will, right, on what they thought would be, because he was leading the best team in the league. I just don't think he's played enough football. He's been off, out of the lineup. His numbers don't pop out. He's been good. He's been fairly consistent, but good and fairly consistent isn't outstanding. So I do think Bo, personally, I mean, as we head in now, I mean, I'll be putting a lot of thought into it. I haven't made that decision. We won't know. I'm assuming, Bo will come out as the MOP for Hamilton, but it will be interesting. I think it deserves some thought, but I definitely don't think that, the fact that, Bo and the Ticats weren't able to make the playoffs, he had an efficiency rating over 100. So there are things that do show individual performances that should outweigh, necessarily where you fit in the standings. And just when you look at the East Division, I just think Bo is quite honestly an obvious candidate. If he doesn't come out, then he's going to be probably in the top 2.
Marshall, he's got more than 1,000 yards passing than anyone else. I have been watching this league for decades. I don't think I've ever seen that. I mean, even in the Flutie years, McManus would be close. 1,000 yards. Yeah. It's insane.
Yeah, I agree. When we ran that graphic on Friday night, as he was kind of closing out the fourth quarter, I wanted to make sure it was right. Like, I pressed talk back to our producer, John Hines, and I'm like, hey, is that accurate? Is that up to date? He's like, yeah. I'm like, and Zach is in second, and Kolaros has a bye week? He's like, yeah. I'm like, damn. Well, how did that happen? Like, how did you get 1,000 yards ahead? But by the way, I'm hearing unconfirmed reports that the president of the FRC actually has the veto on all things MOP. So that's Joe. I do have the tiebreaker, but I rarely, if ever, used it. I rarely, if ever, had to use. I just thought I'd spin a fun rumor for you to get everybody as soon as the MOP gets awarded. Hey, what the hell did Jeff do? That's wrong. That's not okay. No, but your mentions would be fun on that one. But I would just say that for me, like, when Jeff speaks about it being a strange year, the reason he honestly is 1,000 ahead is because Kolaros started obviously super slow, and then many of the other quarterbacks missed big chunks of time. Bo missed some time. He didn't miss big chunks of time. And when you ask the question of outstanding, right, this is always the idea of the MOP, not the MVP. It's like most valuable, probably not Bo. Most outstanding, yeah. Like, most, if you're talking outstanding and it's being used literally, which I believe it should, then like Cody Fajardo was, I think, the East MOP front runner until the hamstring injury, because his numbers at the start of the season, they actually were outstanding. He was really, really special, and he started the year on an absolute heater, and we were all like, how have they carried the momentum of the Grey Cup over? That doesn't seem possible, but he did. And then it's been a bit of a slow slide, and as you say, consistent and all the rest. It doesn't necessarily scream outstanding. If you're going to have a year in which, and this is the other thing too, right? The voting format is who is the MOP for the Montreal Alouettes, I think, is the big question, because you're not going to have, Justin Hardy's probably the MOP nominee coming out from the Ottawa Redblacks. And if you're looking at the Toronto Argonauts, I mean, Janarian Grant is probably, like, in terms of most outstanding, the one who's made the biggest impact on your team. So if you put Janarian up against Justin Hardy, up against Bo Levi Mitchell, now you get to the question of Montreal, where it's like, well, Darnell Sankey is arguably their most outstanding player, but he's just got a bunch of tackles. Okay, well, Tyrese Beverett, it depends what flavor you like of your coffee. Do you just want a guy who has a ton of tackles year over year over year over year? Or do you want Tyrese Beverett, who has 4 of those and 3 of these and 2 of those and 6 of those? And, like, you go down it's okay, so you have a stat stuffer and you have this, and then you have a quarterback for a team that won the division but isn't really outstanding. And the question, I think, for Montreal media and their voting, and also the team nominating, is who gives Montreal the best chance to actually be the MOP nominee? Because the politics of this is that you actually have to essentially decide who gives you the best chance to have your team recognized. And if I'm the Montreal Alouettes, I don't think you can nominate Cody Fajardo because he's going to get beat by Bo. So your best chance to have an MOP come from the Alouettes this year, I think, is Tyrese Beverett. But then the question is, are people going to take Tyrese Beverett over Bo Levi? Because I don't think Justin Hardy's going to get it from the East, even though he's had an incredible season. They're just not going to respect a ton of catches unless he ends up leading the league in catches and yards and targets and all these things. But even then, you put that up against Bo, and I think Bo's going to get the respect from it. So, yeah, to Jeff's point, in a weird year with a lot of reasons why the overall MOP, not even just in the East, it could be Brady, it could be Bo, it could be Tyrese Beverett, it could be Roland Milligan. Like, that seems like that's kind of the four that would go into that spot and be favored, I have a really hard time making an argument against Bo, because it's not Bo's fault that Jordan Williams retired before the season began and they had to scrape together a defense. It's not Bo's fault that the special teams at the start of the season were very poor to the point where they had to fire their special teams coordinator. It's not Bo's fault that Mark Washington was running a defense that didn't really gel with a young back end. Like, none of that has anything to do with Bo Levi Mitchell. So why would we hold them being out of the playoffs against his case?
It's interesting because, and to all your points, and Joey, I'll come to you with this. At TSN, I thought it was real interesting. Milt Stiegel's at the desk and saying, well, if it's not Bo who's the East MOP, who is? And there was this long pause before anyone could kind of come up with a name, and then there was a couple of names that came out. But I don't think we've ever seen anything like this. Again, based on the fact, I think it's good. I think you have to go back to, I think, the early 80s before there was anyone that was on a team that did not qualify for the playoffs that was named the most outstanding player.
And you look at the title, and I like that, like you made that note and distinguished that, Marsh, as you got, excuse me, it is the most outstanding player. And it's for the regular season. And we talk about numbers popping. Yeah, of course. You look at it, he's leading all the categories when it comes to passing yards and things like that. And Bo's back, really. I mean, if you're in Hamilton, you have to be happy with how he's been performing this year, despite everything that you said. I mean, his performance, you cannot peg for Hamilton not making the playoffs. He's been great. And I'd be going into next season very hopeful if you can fill the holes that need to be filled and make sure you have some luck in terms of injuries and things like that. When it comes to Beverette, yeah, for sure. But historically, when it comes to, defensive players, they're not often in the talk for MOP categories. And like you say, it's what's your flavor of what you want. Yeah, the playoffs to an extent does have that sense of, you didn't get to the playoffs, so maybe you don't deserve to be in the MOB conversation, but it's not a playoff award. It's the most outstanding player in the regular season. I would have no problem if he gets the nomination. I don't know if he'll win the MOP, but of course, in a season like this, as you say, it's kind of an anomaly with everything that's happened. So if he were to get it, I don't think he's not worthy of getting the nomination. I don't know if he's going to win, but one thing I will say, he's the best player on the Ticats, and he gives that team a lot of hope, and he's getting up there in years now as well. I mean, he's on the other side of the, closer to retirement than he is his rookie season, but man, he's like top 3 in his own career in almost all those categories. I mean, it's like, this is vintage Bo that we were watching in Calgary way back when, just
and was
slinging
almost
away.
Benched.
So, what's that?
And was almost benched.
He was
exactly.
benched.
Well, he was benched.
This is my favorite thing, is like from calling, I forget who it was, but I called 2 games of Hamilton, and we talked to Scott Milanovich, who's extremely honest with us on our Zoom calls to the CFL and TSN, and he basically is just like, yeah, man, like he's trying to figure it out in real time, and it's not going well. And then there was actually a moment in game where I heard it from our parabolic mics on the sideline, right? Those big round ones they hold down, where Bo rolls to his right, and I'm calling the action, throws it across his body, almost gets intercepted. And I heard Milanovich yell, "Stop bleeping doing that!" Like at the top of his lungs. He screamed it, and then the next game, it's like he's benched. So it was coming for a while. But when Joey makes the point about, he's got all these numbers and it's vintage Bo, the thing I love the most about Bo, and the thing I'm really going to miss when he is done playing, vintage Bo means that this is also a career high for interceptions for him. Right? Because in 2016 and 2018, he had all these touchdowns and crossed the 30 touchdown mark and the 5,000 passing yards. But when Bo is at his best, he's taking risks. Like he's being daring, and he's trying to throw his team back into the game and all the rest. So I love that we've seen him turn back the clock for the good, but also the bad, because I genuinely believe that Bo is at his best when he's just playing wide open, because that's who he's always been when he's playing well.
Interesting race, guys, and we're going to see what happens, obviously, when we get closer to Grey Cup week. Montreal Alouettes still have the best record, guys, at 12-4, and of course, they are the defending Grey Cup champions. But, Joey, are they still the best team in the Canadian Football League, in your opinion, right now, if you did your own personal power rankings?
Well, the standings say they are, and their Grey Cup championship says they're still the team that you have to beat to get to the Grey Cup championship. But no, this is not the team that we became accustomed to seeing, early in the season. And I said this when I was on the show before, it kind of felt like maybe this is a team kind of going through their own little start of the Winnipeg era, right? They kind of came into the Grey Cup last year, surprised everybody, beat the favored Bombers. In fact, was talking to a guy in Cleveland who heard I was from Canada. He's like, I bet on the Grey Cup every year. Those Bombers lost me a lot of money. They were supposed to be favorites. And I was like, well, that's probably why you should watch the sport that you're betting on. But anyway, but no, this is a team that, built some momentum late in the season last year and then carried it through the playoffs. This year, it seems the total opposite. It seems like they're losing steam as they go into the playoffs, and they look vulnerable. I mean, yeah, they've not often had luck in BC, but man, VA was having a time against them this over the weekend. And this is a team that didn't put up a single point until the fourth quarter. I get it, when there's nothing to lose right now, but maybe you're taking the foot off the gas a little bit. But I mean, it didn't seem like they were given anything this weekend. And that's something that I feel like, hey, I can't say they're the best team in the CFL right now if that's the case. Now, I would say that if you're taking the Alouettes and you look at like last year, the Argonauts were coming off their Grey Cup, and then they seemed to fizzle out last year as they were going forward. But I think this season here, they have one really good opportunity coming up this week playing Winnipeg. Now, I know both teams are first in their division. It doesn't mean anything, but it's still an opportunity at home in front of your home crowd to get maybe another win against a team like the Blue Bombers and just build up a little confidence. I mean, you need confidence going into the playoffs. You can't forget that you're the first place team. You can't forget how you got there. I mean, I remember watching them, though. I was in Calgary a few weeks back when they were playing there, the tie game, right? And it seemed like Calgary was trying to lose it. It was a weird scene to watch. It was not a great football game to attend. But that was the moment where I'm like, I don't know. Like, at the end of the day, championship teams, they're going to snuff out. And, they'll say sometimes when you're playing a team that's below you, you play to their level, but it didn't seem like that. This was a team that should have rolled in there, got that game over with, and got some guys some playing time that could have used it, right? Get to your depth a little bit. But I don't have much confidence going into the playoffs in Montreal right now. In fact, I'd say Toronto, looking at the East teams left, is probably the team that would be the most dangerous to come out of the East. But Montreal's got one chance here, one game left to try and prove some sort of point, get things going. And then if they can't do that this week, I'd have serious concerns. But this isn't a normal last game of the season. I think they got to look at this and be like, we got to get some momentum here with some of our guys and get them going so we can make a run of our own and get back to that Grey Cup final.
Jeff, I can already hear Jason Moss, the head coach. He's going to start up that we get no respect. And I think we're 12-4. We're the best. And I don't know if that's going to work a second time like it certainly did when they ran to the Grey Cup last year. Are you liking what you're seeing right now, or are they just kind of playing peekaboo right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I'm with Joey. I'm traditional in that until you lose the Grey Cup and until you're not first place, all those records, whatnot, that you're still the best team technically in the CFL. Now, obviously, I don't think you can make the argument that Montreal has been the best team in the CFL really since the month of August. I mean, they're 2-3-1 since winning in I think August 25th. They have a bye week, and then over the long weekend, and then again 2-3-1, including a tie against Calgary, and just not really inspired play. Obviously, some of that, including a game against Ottawa at home, they didn't need anything, and Ottawa needed that game, and they won that game. So you got to give credit to Montreal in that one. It's tough to manufacture, that going 100%, that going balls to the wall, if you will, when you're not playing for something. I mean, there is that logic, obviously, of being the hammer and nail, and you don't want to take off plays and go easy on certain things because it can turn into being work against you and end up getting injured trying to take it easy or whatever. I'm not suggesting any of that stuff, but going into games when everything's on the line, when Cody Fajardo's addressing the team, this is do or die, all those things that go into must-win games, we just haven't seen the Alouettes face that situation here. We've seen a lot of great runs here down the stretch of the season, including, in your neck of the woods, Bubba and Hamilton. I mean, when I asked Bo, when I sat down with them when I was in Hamilton, I said, well, how much of this is the fact that your backs are up against the wall and you've been forced to play playoff football right now? And he admitted that was a big part of it. A big part of their success was knowing that the margin of error is so slim. And I'm glad you brought up Jason Moss, because I think that's the big thing here. I think like Jason Moss, like Mike O'Shea here in Winnipeg, I don't think you're going to have an Alouettes team that's puffing their chest, feeling like, they're the top dogs going into the playoffs. And I think that they wouldn't be feeling that way if they had won all these games leading into this month. I just think that's the attitude, the personality that winning teams have. I mentioned O'Shea because I think Jason Moss and O'Shea are cut from the same football cloth. I think they have the similar approaches to the game. And so, what we saw from, when things mattered down the stretch for Montreal, they played their best football last season and then well into the playoffs, obviously, and then winning the Grey Cup. So this isn't a team. I will say there's some concern. I think if you're Jason Moss, you're in your office and you're not happy with the way that your team's been playing week in and week out. But I think for him, the most important thing right now is health, navigating who he's going to play. There's a lot of injuries, as we all know, that surface at this time of the season, and whether it's sitting Austin Mack out and Fletcher, just to ensure that their recent injuries or their ailments aren't going to be worsened. My point is, I think Jason Moss's focus is less about his guys executing 100% on every play. Of course, he's wanting that and demanding that, if you will, and would be certainly on game day. I think Montreal's big focus here and understanding what they went through last year is to get themselves in the best position to be great, to be great in the playoffs. And I have no doubt in my mind, given their defense, given their leadership on offense, given their talent on offense, that when push comes to shove and the playoffs start, Montreal is not going to be an easy out by any stretch.
Marsh, Jeff brings up injuries, and it has been true. I don't know what you think, but since Philpott went down, I feel like that offense has been a little wonky. Was he that important?
Yeah, I think so, because they ran a lot of everybody knows Jason Moss loves running tunnel screens and smoke screens and all the rest, and Tyson was kind of that guy for them, and they've obviously mixed and matched and found some solutions. But, for me personally, I just wish we would get a full season of Tyson alongside Keon Julian Grant healthy for the full year, because they're so good to watch live, and the way that they play off of each other, the physicality of Keon and the quick route running of Tyson is so much fun, and they just keep having season-ending injuries side by side, which honestly, when Tyson went down, we interviewed Keon leading into that week, and he said, well, last year, I was done for the year, and I got to watch Tyson score the game-winning touchdown in the Grey Cup. And basically, he's like, well, as soon as Tyson had this injury, he basically tapped me on the shoulder once it was confirmed and said, okay, well, now it's my turn to watch you score the game-winning touchdown in the Grey Cup, right? So those guys care a lot about each other. I wish we get to see them more often. But by the way, Joey just made me realize for the first time, I don't know why I hadn't realized this, that we have the potential of an Argos East final revenge game to make up for last year on the road in Montreal and try, that's... If we get that, if Toronto goes through Ottawa and goes into Montreal, you imagine if they just completely flipped the script in that East Final and Montreal was sitting there quietly stunned the same way that BMO Field was in last year's East Final. But Montreal, for me, I've rambled a lot on this podcast, so I'll make this one super quick. I'm going to say they're not the best team in the CFL right now because I just want Jason Moss and Cody Fajardo to hear it. I want for them to hear people doubting them, and then I want to see what the bleep you just watched 2 Electric Boogaloo looks like, because I honestly that sequel, I'm down to watch that. If they get pissed off and they play angry the same way they did last year, it's a totally different vibe when you're the team that has the bye and gets to go in as first in the division and home field, and you're 4 quarters away from the Grey Cup. And I would love for everybody, the whole story going into that game, to be like, yeah, you guys won, but I don't know, we're not really convinced. And then to just get angry about it and see what that looks like this year, because it's a very similar group. I remember the first Montreal game I called this year was looking at the roster. Ottawa was playing in Montreal. It was week 3 or week 4. I was going down through, and AJ Jakubik from TSN 1200 in Ottawa was staying there next to me, and we were going over pronunciations and things and just kind of talking about the Alouettes roster. And we kind of looked at each other as we were going down through. We're like, I don't have any pronunciation questions because these are all the same dudes that were here last year.
Yeah.
They actually have continuity, which is extremely rare outside of Winnipeg, to be able to have that many players that you look at the week 1 roster and you go, yeah, I know 95% of these players. So obviously they have the capability of bringing back to life what motivated them last year. I would love to see them try to do it. I think it'd be great theater.
Joey, I think it's hilarious that Marshall brings that up about the motivation key that they, and that's why I brought up the Jason Moss thing as well too. I never really saw Winnipeg do that during their nice run, but I just feel Saskatchewan, no. Hamilton, Toronto, no, but it seems to be. I mean, even right down to the French language question, they just seem to get all fired up and saying that the world is against them. But it seems to have worked for them.
You know what? And there's no crazier fan base in any sport that I've ever been to, whether it be junior hockey or any sport. Football, I shouldn't say football, but we'll say lacrosse even. I know that from experience. The French Canadian fans can get really wild when their team is doing well and could be a real push. Now I'm wondering, do we have a conspiracy theory on our hands that they're throwing these games to build themselves up as underdogs so that they have that kind of motivation and mentality going in? So now I'm thinking this is all by design and this is just a genius play. But no, I'd love to see that revenge game. And the one thing I will say, especially when it comes to Cody Fajardo. I mean, here's a guy that was, pretty much written off when he got to Montreal, and look what he was capable of doing. He's been in this situation before, and it looked like that's when he was most comfortable because he won a Grey Cup, right? When he was trying to prove everybody wrong. So here's a team that won a Grey Cup. They're not getting the respect right now that, a Grey Cup defending team currently leading their division would normally get. So maybe it's a recipe for disaster for the rest of the league. But as what I'm seeing right now, conspiracy theories aside, if that revenge game comes in, I'm going to take Toronto over Montreal.
Bubba, I need to remind you of something. You had a front row seat to the Bombers 2019 run in Hamilton. It was, I'd almost say it was almost identical to the Alouettes' personality. Last year, I thought the Alouettes last year, I felt like they were the Winnipeg Blue Bombers of 2019 with the Ticats at home, feeling good, feeling great about themselves, and the Bombers just having this quiet confidence, right? I remember the distinction between those two pressers, right? You had Simone Lawrence, and you had the Ticats that brought energy to every presser. They were just excited to be there and whatever. And then the Bombers were just business, right? It was just like, this is what we have to say and we're done. And I felt like the Alouettes were that last year.
I feel like Winnipeg didn't do any talking though. I think they did all their talking on the field in that game.
Yeah, but
and I'll be honest with you, I've never been in a situation in that Grey Cup in Calgary, where I'm, with many of you guys and of course the conversations are going, how do you think this is going to play out? And I've never been so cocky. I have never been so cocky and so convinced that this was, they had gone 3-0 against Winnipeg that season in the regular season. I felt, they're 15-3. Marsh, you know what it's been like in Hamilton, 15-3. I mean, that's incredible.
Crazy. Yeah, no doubt. But I do want to say too, like Jeff made the point earlier about Jason Moss and Mike O'Shea being very similar and cut from that same football cloth. And I feel like the organization as a whole takes on the identity of the starting quarterback and the head coach. And those two people, like when you're talking about Fajardo being veteran now and what Collaros was in 2019, O'Shea and Jason Moss, it's like there's a reason that feels like that. There's a reason that they don't need to talk, is because they just know, and they know that it doesn't matter how much you talk unless you actually back it up, which obviously Hamilton didn't in that game. But I can also confirm, as somebody who's lost a Vanier Cup in Montreal against the University of Montreal Carabin, that Joey is correct, that the French-Canadian fans, they will eat your soul. And it is going to be extremely, 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 extremely loud in that East final. And a quick noise story for you, by the way, in terms of how crazy that place gets from somebody like I've been on the field in a big playoff game, national championship, and we script our plays and all the rest, and McMaster goes in. We're playing Montreal in Montreal, and we know it's going to be crazy. We know it's going to be loud. I go in shotgun, very first play of the game. And we go offside procedure, whatever it is, like half our offensive line just rolls out of their stance and fumbles forwards. And I didn't even skip a beat. Everyone walked towards me. I went, come here. They all held it up. I went, we're under center for the rest of the game. Like I screamed at them. I'm like, we're under center for the rest of the game. And every single person in the huddle looked at me like, what? We've never done that. I'm like, we can either have a procedure call every single offensive snap of this game, or I can go under center. It's up to you guys. And they're like, okay, yeah, under center it is. And we went from there. But it was like that crowd, the energy that will be inside Percival Molson, it has the potential to fuel Montreal to crazy heights that they haven't been able to reach in the second half of the season.
Marsh, in that game, though, and you played well, and that was a real close game. But how many picks did you throw in that game?
I don't even know, but it wasn't good. The one, I will say this, the one down the left sideline, not that I remember every single detail of it, we had an option route on, and Max Cameron ran a go, and then I think Adam Thibault came over or something from free safety and basically ran him out of bounds, and he didn't catch it in bounds because once I saw the replay afterwards, it was crazy that we didn't have instant replay because they called it a pick on the field and we didn't have review. It's okay.
All right, guys, let's move along. I had to go back into Marsh's past. I know he holds that stuff proud. And good for
every
you.
time
Good
I go
for
to
you,
call
though.
every time I go to call an Alouettes game, though, I basically walk into the stadium. I'm like, I hate this place.
As beautiful as it is, I hate it.
Okay, let's go to the other side of the country here. Head coach Rick Campbell has revealed to the media, and he's done it early, Vernon Adams Jr. will be the starting QB in not only this week, not only last week, but he's gone as far as to say that VA is going to be his guy in the West semifinal. Jeff Hamilton, are you convinced that this is the right move based on his mindset from the past?
Absolutely, I think this is the right move. I mean, I think it was pretty. If it wasn't clear, prior to the game, just what we've seen from Nathan Rourke over the last 8 starts, if it wasn't clear from that, if it wasn't clear from the performance in which we saw Vernon Adams dismantle what was, yes, a Montreal Alouettes team that wasn't playing for much, but still, put up the numbers that he did. If that wasn't clear after that, it was certainly clear in some of the post-game remarks from his teammates that pretty much proved that it wasn't a divided room, Bubba. It was a room that was pro Vernon Adams. This is a group that obviously believes this is Vernon Adams' team. It makes me think, I don't think it hits, tinfoil hat territory just yet, but it makes me think that I think Rick Campbell wanted this the whole time. I think he wanted to go back to Vernon Adams, whether it was reflective in his, what I thought was a just bizarre / ridiculous decision to put Adams in after halftime, after Nathan Rourke had led the Lions to a touchdown drive right before halftime. I forget what game that was. Anyways, and then then Vernon Adams was lit up, didn't play well at all in that second half. And you can make the argument his stock
that was against the Argonauts.
It was, yeah, exactly. But I've personally been calling for this, if you will, suggesting that this needed to happen either last game or the game before that, because clearly, whether it's the lack of a training camp, whether it's the lack of, the same personnel from that 2022 BC Lions team, whether it's, players butthurt, and let's be frank about it. Anyone who's been in the BC Lions locker room, if anyone's going to get mentally rocked by this, it's the BC Lions. Like they're a talented team. They're a super gifted team. They're not mentally tough. And I know that's a massive insult, to say, because, you're testing the mental fortitude of guys that put their bodies on the line week in and week out. But it was so obvious that this team wanted Vernon Adams to be their quarterback from the beginning. And then the comments afterwards suggest. So, it's the right choice in the sense that I do think that it gives the Lions the best opportunity to win what will probably be a game in Regina. I think the timing is pretty, strategic in that you just saw Nathan Rourke, crap the bed in Riderville, and maybe you want to see a different look from Vernon Adams. But at the end of the day, I just think, you have Nathan Rourke as your future. I think, you now have cemented VA as your present. You bring in that good vibes, and this is like, I get it. Like, I love the team camaraderie, but like them bringing in all these new moves, after getting first downs and bringing that joy in, I see the benefit to that and the support that they're giving VA. You guys know what I'm referring to. They're like crossing their arms and like doing this exit. It was like this solidarity thing and getting back to enjoying the first downs. That's what's wrong about this team. This team is all about, trying to feel good rather than just getting the job done, rather than just executing, rather than getting their hands dirty. Everything needs to be pretty on the BC Lions. So if the BC Lions are going to win the Grey Cup this year, it's going to be off the flash of Vernon Adams. It's going to be off the cockiness of Alexander Hollins. It's going to be off the consistency of Justin McKinnon. It's going to be all these things that just didn't really show up throughout the season, did obviously early on, but they're going to try to recapture and get it all done. The fact I'm drowning on here now, but my final point in all this is I just don't think Rick Campbell handled this the right way. And now he's left with a situation where he probably wanted this before, and hopefully it works out, because if this doesn't work out for them and they go get their asses kicked in that West semifinal, it's going to look horrendous at the end of the year, and it's going to be viewed as nothing other than just a disastrous situation with the quarterback room after Nathan Rourke got signed.
Joey, it made all kinds of sense. Nathan was ready to come back to the Canadian Football League. It made every sense in the word for the BC Lions to do what they did as an organization. It also made a lot of sense because VA had a hurt, injured knee. So you get, a guy that was, maybe one of the best players we'd ever seen in 22. It made a lot of sense. But when VA was healthy, why do you think Rick Campbell was resistant to get back to the guy that was arguably the leader for the MOP? There was no discussion at that point, even though they got their butts kicked in Winnipeg in a shutout loss. But I still thought, everyone thought Vernon Adams Jr. was the leader for the MOP. Why didn't they go back to him?
I just think there was an aura about Rourke, right? Like the 22 season that he had, then off to the NFL. And the conversation before he came back was, when is he going to get a shot in the NFL, right? And he put a lot of time into that. I think Rourke, it's not a wrong move. It's just, it was an unfortunate situation for him because you're coming in mid-season. I mean, this move doesn't happen unless the stars align, and Vernon Adams goes down. And there's probably a little bit of concern when he's coming back. What's he going to be like, right? A knee injury can really affect any athlete, let alone a quarterback, and a guy who can use his legs. And I think it was just a matter of, do we need to let Rourke get going to get back to the 2022, or, do we go back to Vernon Adams? It's like a gift and a curse when you get Nathan Rourke in this situation, because you essentially have two no doubt starting quarterbacks on your roster. I think this is the right decision. As Jeff said, this is their identity. You can make whatever argument you want as to whether you want that kind of hard-nosed football but they're going with the flash. They're a team that they want to be pretty. And I mean, you watch that game, there are plenty of pretty plays put on there over the weekend. So this is a team that, hey, we're going to lean into our identity. It's too late to do anything drastic now, and you have to make a decision at the end of the day. And I think him making it this far in advance, it eliminates any kind of speculation moving forward. You can speculate whether it's the right decision, but now they know going into that West semifinal, that is their guy. The guys can get behind him. And yeah, Jeff's right. If it doesn't work out, we're going to look at this and, maybe it was a big mess up. But at the end of the day, doesn't matter what decision you made. If you lose, it's the wrong decision, right? And you don't know. Hindsight is always 20/20. But in this particular scenario, I mean, Vernon Adams looks very healthy. He looks like he's ready to play. He's got something to prove as well, right? Because Rourke came in, if it weren't for the injury, that was going to be his season. And now I'm wondering, is he playing with a little bit of an edge of like, no, this is my team and I'm going to prove it. And I want to go out and win a Grey Cup and establish myself as one of the great quarterbacks in this league. And that's a dangerous thing too. Yes, this is Nathan Rourke's team in the future. The other thing I look at too, not saying it is a thing, but if he goes out and has a really good playoff run, whether that's a Grey Cup or just, pad some stats in the playoffs, you've got two starting quarterbacks signed to what, like 26 right now? And there's a lot of money tied to both of them. Might put up some trade value where next year you can fill some pretty big holes if you trade one of those quarterbacks and stick with one, right? But I think at the end of the day, no one's thinking about that. The BC Lions want to win a Grey Cup. They've been so close. They've been a top team in the West for so long. They need to get over that hump. And I think VA is their best option to do so. And for VA, he just wants to establish himself as a great quarterback in this league and get that Grey Cup ring. So I have no issues with this. I think it's the right decision.
Marsh, you're my quarterback technician here. Is it, when you look at Jordan Maximic's offense, is VA just a better fit?
Yeah, I think right now, right? That's the whole thing. That's the premise that we're all kind of getting to the heart of this is right now it's the right choice. I think Rourke is going to be great again in the Canadian Football League. He works hard. He cares. He is a believer in his craft. I think if he has a little bit of time to settle his, experience in the NFL, come to terms with it and really dig back into the CFL game, I think he'll be the best fit for them long term. But for VA, like, it's so great, man, when you have a relationship with an offensive coordinator, because John Behe was my offensive coordinator at McMaster, and John Behe and I were so on the same page by the time that I was done playing that, we inside run on 1st and 10, pick up 2, it's 2nd and 8. I look at the sideline, I open my play band and I go, give me 60 levels win, John. You know what? Like, I'm talking to myself going, you know that I want 60 Oakland swap. Give me 60 Oakland swap. And then I look down, he signals in red 3. I go, yep, there it is. Okay, we're good. Right. And I think that's what VA and Jordan McSimic are right now. Now, obviously they had that with Rourke previously, but for right now, I just feel as though specifically with the West semi, when we're talking about naming him as the starter, the only proof you need that Vernon Adams Jr. is the right pick in this time, this situation with this roster is last year's West semi. That first half that he played is the cleanest, most efficient, most explosive combination of elements I've seen in the playoffs in a quarterback in like the last 5 years. Like, it was the best playoff football a quarterback has played in a long time. So I don't know why you wouldn't start him. And I'll also say this in terms of sports psychology from a former quarterback, outside of, having the belief of the guys around you, which obviously Vernon has, having the belief of, your fan base or, anything like that, there's nothing that allows you to play more free than not having to look over your shoulder. So announcing that VA is going to be the guy, man, it's an incredible mood boost. And my experience with this, again, just going back to McMaster, was when I was a first-year starter in 2013, right? I've been sitting on the bench for 3 years behind Kyle Quinlan. I get a chance to be a starter. And we really didn't have anybody that was even a threat to me as a backup. Like, we had like 3 first-year kids that we had recruited, and it was like, yeah, whenever Marsh is done, like, you guys are going to play. But I didn't feel that pressure, that push going forward. And so I just basically, I had like a Bo Levi Mitchell season like this year without as many yards in 2013, but it was just a ton of touchdowns and a ton of picks, and I was just like running around going crazy. And then in my final year, 2014, we recruited Asher Hastings, who was a Regina Thunder champion, and he's, I'm 6'2", he's 6'4", I'm 190 pounds, he's 210. I'm looking at this kid coming in, I'm like, oh my God, he's bigger than me, he's stronger than me, he's a champion, he's played junior football, he's got this experience. And so during training camp, I'm like, I gotta be on my stuff, because I might get replaced by this first year guy coming in or whatever. And we went through training camp, and it was pretty obvious by like day 5 or 6 that he just hadn't picked up the offense well enough. And because I'd been around for 5 years, I was good to go. And they announced me as the starting quarterback, confirm it yet. And the coaches are like, it was never in doubt. We're bringing in Asher because he's the guy moving forward and all the rest. And once I had that vote of confidence, that fueled me in 2014 to play free, because I thought, I know that they want me to be the player. He's the plan for down the road. I'm the right now guy. And that's exactly what VA and Rourke, I think, are going through right now, is VA is going to feel so free and play so fast because he knows he has the confidence of, oh, I'm the guy for this moment, and all I can do is maximize this moment. Now, if you're looking for a Rourke Asher Hastings comparison from that whole whatever that I just did, the next year Asher Hastings broke every record in the entire country that has been like over the last 20 years. Like, he was a freak, and he threw for them. He beat Chris Flynn's touchdown record, and on and on and on. So there is potential for greatness down the road for Rourke. I think it will return. But in this moment, to play free, to have the confidence of the people around you, it's VA, unquestionably.
And the other thing I want to say, too, is I think from a standpoint with Rourke, it can almost look at it as a reset, right? You came in mid-season, sit this one out, and you're not sit it out. You're going to be the backup. And that's the other thing, too. If something doesn't go right and this goes completely to the left, you've got Nathan Rourke as your backup. So you got to be feeling really good if you're in terms of your quarterback play, if you're BC. But I think, if I look at it from a mindset and if your approach, how you would approach Severe Rourke, it's a reset. You're here, you're going through it, you're getting, back into this offense. You've gone through your adversity now in the CFL. You're going to go through this playoff run, not in the area you want to be, but you're going to come back next year with more motivation. And as you said, Marsh, knowing that this is your team moving forward. I mean, and who knows, maybe next year this is another conversation going into training camp, of who's number one, because I think that is a very valid conversation next year when they both get training camps. But right now, I think it's just a matter of, okay, didn't go as planned in my return, but this is not what defines me. This is just what I need to do to get to that next step in this league after playing NFL football for the last couple of years.
Just one last thing to Jeff on this before we get to our final question. I don't know if you noticed this, Jeff, and it was maybe only the last 2 games that Nathan was starting, that like if there was a turnover or a sack, it's VA halfway out the field patting guys on the back. It's even on the bench at times, it looked like everyone was sitting around VA, and Nathan was kind of standing by himself. Like, I mean, was it like really in front of us? Whatever, if you want it, I don't want to call it chemistry issues, but that VA was their guy.
Absolutely. It was right from the start, Bubba. Like, I mean, and I'm not trying to say maliciously, like, I'm not saying, players vindictively, like, went against the BC Lions and they've always been a VA guy. I mean, Vernon Adams, well documented, would fly out players in the off season. They would train together. They obviously, I couldn't even imagine how often they would have talked about the 2025 Grey Cup being in BC and this being our year and let's do it. Let's get after it. And, having those emotional connections with your teammates. VA's has gone through an interesting evolution as a quarterback in this league. He's gone through an interesting evolution as a leader in this league. And I think he was finally starting to get it, right? He was finally starting to understand what it took to be an everyday CFL star, not just everyday CFL player. And so I'm with you, Bubba. I mean, I think right off the bat, though, in my conversations with Vernon Adams, and it's interesting, it's a bit off topic, but I thought he was in one of the best situations he could possibly be in the considering the situation. Obviously, context matters here. Of course, he would want to lead the BC Lions to the Grey Cup and bring the championship to Vancouver and all that other good stuff. And I'm sure he envisioned all that stuff. But he could have just sat there for the rest of the season. If Nathan Rourke would have lit things up, he would just be sitting at a 3-year max deal contract, staring it down. When in reality, he wasn't playing that great before he got injured. Like, he was getting lit up by the Bombers in that 25-0 loss. And I'll remind everybody here and listening that it wasn't until the fourth quarter, really, when the game was completely out of reach, that he left the game. So my point in that is saying that I absolutely think, like, even in the immediate aftermath of signing Nathan Rourke, players, I was in Vancouver, just happened to be in Vancouver that week, talking to players, they were biting their tongue. The stuff I was hearing behind the scenes, again, it wasn't like, guys were throwing hissy fits or whatever, but guys were emotionally hurt by the decision to bring in a quarterback and then start him over Vernon Adams. And I think when you play in a couple other things, whether you want to, when you look at Nathan Rourke's body language, as you alluded to, Bubba, like, I think he's just, that game, that so important game against the Riders in Regina, who is addressing the team at the start of the game with the big motivational speech. It's Vernon Adams. It's not, but I also think that Nathan Rourke understands that. Nathan Rourke shouldn't be the guy necessarily leading that group when you have a leader in Vernon Adams there. I don't think that those things, whether it's VA, high-fiving guys coming off the line or having that pregame speech, that shouldn't matter on a team who has an ultimate goal, whether whoever's doing it, because Nathan Rourke shouldn't come in to a whole new team midway through the season and be the voice. In fact, Zach Collaros came in and marched the Bombers to a Grey Cup championship in 2019. You think he went into the locker room and started telling the leaders what they're going to do? You think when I spoke to Bo Levi Mitchell last year, he told me the biggest difference with his situation in Hamilton versus his situation in Calgary, there was lots of them, but the one that stuck out to me was he couldn't interrupt Scott Milanovic in meetings. This guy would just ignore Dave Dickinson, or not, like, he would interrupt Dave Dickinson if he saw something. If Dave was speaking and he saw something, he would interrupt and say to a receiver, "This is what you need to do. Stop Dave mid-sentence," because he had that, aura to the team. That you don't have that aura to a new team. So Nathan Rourke, even though he was a former member of the BC Lions, we know how much turnover there is in this league. He can't come in and be like the ultimate, voice there. I mean, you'd want that by now. But my final point in all this is that when it comes down to it, Nathan Rourke, he knows that he's the future of this team. I mean, they've been talking to him about it. They put the money where their mouth is. At this point, he needs to be what VA was. A good cheerleader, a guy to come in and so far what we've seen from Nathan Rourke is just that. We've seen him be supportive of Vernon Adams and all that. I just, my final thing on this was, I was a little harsh on the whole handling of the quarterbacks. I do think there was a distinct moment in the season, particularly that touchdown Pacific game in Victoria. You weren't going to sit down Nathan Rourke in that game. That was probably the first game that Vernon Adams was nearing a return 100%. And then he throws the lights out in that game. And then they beat Montreal the next week. So now, if you're Rick Campbell, you're thinking after two pretty slow starts against Winnipeg and against Ottawa, because that was the back-to-back games before they went out to Victoria. You're thinking you're pretty locked in at this point now that he just had a great game, in Victoria, and then followed it up by beating the Grey Cup champions, that you're in a good position. I don't think he would have predicted over the next month that, things would have gone the direction they had. And then ultimately I probably felt like his hands were tied in putting in Vernon Adams, but that's the way it is now. And I think the Lions are better off for it right now than they were with Nathan Rourke behind center.
Like I always like to say, stay tuned. This is going to be fun to watch. Hey, guys, game of the week. I mean, there's obviously some bigger ones that are more meaningful than others. But, Murph, we'll start with you. Tiger Cats in the nation's capital against the Redblacks. Argonauts at Elks. Bombers at Alouettes. Or Stampeders at Rough Riders. The game of the week is?
It's always the game I'm calling, Bubba, so it's Winnipeg-Montreal. There's other games this week? Sorry, all I heard was Winnipeg-Montreal just to drive the ratings. Yeah, it's a one-game week, everyone. It's Winnipeg-Montreal. You can catch it on TSN. No, yeah. To me, there's a lot of things at play with Winnipeg. I love the idea that they're being forced to play in Week 21 in a way that they haven't in previous seasons. Montreal trying to regain some of that mojo, potential Grey Cup preview, on and on and on. Yeah, for me, it's Winnipeg-Montreal.
Joey?
Yeah, same. I mean, I alluded to that a little bit. We were talking about the Owls earlier. It's just, for me, it's just one last game for the Owls to try and build up that confidence and kind of get that home crowd behind them before going on to the, their playoffs. And, they have a lot of pressure on them as well, right? We joked about, the conspiracy theory, but at the end of the day, you're the Grey Cup champion. It hits a little different when you're trying to defend your championship as opposed to what they did last year, right? So I think this is going to be a big game for them and even for the Blue Bombers as well. I mean, this is a chance for them to go through and tune up anything they want to. They're not going to lay over in this one either. Both teams are going to want to get a little bit of momentum before they wait for that semifinal to end and see who they're going to play. So there is a little bit on the line here. It's don't want to say it's a glorified practice by any stretch, but here's your time to get everything you want to work in a game-like situation. If there's players you want to see, you can get them in any kind of formations, whatever. But I think for the Owls, more importantly, I think there's just a little bit more on the line than you would expect for someone who's leading the division in the last game of the year.
Jeff, what was the mood like after Zach Collaros got sacked for the 7th time by the Toronto Argonauts at Princess Autumn?
You know what? It was a weird vibe after the game because the game was such a dog's breakfast. You know what I mean? Like it was 2 great defensive efforts, 2 missed field goals by the Bombers in a 3-point game. So it's just, I think they felt like they should have won that game. So it was just, the mood was, it wasn't a cockiness. It was just weird. So guys didn't really have any kind of opinion. They didn't get beat up. They didn't, they didn't get, they didn't dominate. They didn't get the business done. So it was just like, okay, we're off on a bye week. But I know that the answer to this weekend's question is obvious. It's I know there's the MOP watch with Bo. There's who knows what happens with maybe the Edmonton Elks can get their first return touchdown in the decade. Who knows? I think that's still out there. Pending. Maybe we can look forward to that game. But it's gonna be Winnipeg-Montreal until we see the final score in that game, and then it becomes Saskatchewan, Calgary, potentially if the Bombers can't take care of business. But certainly when you look at when you look what's up for grabs this weekend, I don't think there's another one that compares to Winnipeg, Montreal.
Just for argument's sake, isn't there something to be said about Saskatchewan? Like they're sneaky right now. Like they're on the Joey. They're like they're really sneaky good right now. And I gotta say this, with all due respect to what Hamilton did last week. The Stamps look like there got to be jobs on the line here. Like they have to play better than they did last week against Hamilton.
I also think they're kind of flying under the radar. I don't think we've mentioned the Saskatchewan Roughriders at any point in the show up until now, right? So yeah, there's an opportunity there as well. I mean, this is a team that, hey, they've been under the Bomber shadow for a real long time, and I don't think I have to describe that rivalry out here. So I would like to see how they're going to play in this game. And just in the playoffs, this is a team that, we're talking about Montreal rightfully and, how they're going through the underdog thing. But there's a team that might surprise as well going into the playoffs simply because they're just kind of flying under the radar. They're playing decent football, and they're in a position, too, that, they're second place right now? And then if they can go in and take that game, depending on the Bombers' outcome, as Jeff was saying. I mean, there is some on the line here, but I think the Riders are a team that we didn't talk about this week, but next week might be a big topic of conversation depending on how things pan out. But the thing about this year, and we were talking about Ottawa earlier and saying how, wow, not really a team that's going to win the Grey Cup. And they're more like the team that played in the first half than the fourth quarter. But this year just feels like we might be in for some surprises, right? Last year we had Montreal going on their run. Anything can happen. And I'm wondering if this might be a year where all the Riders noise comes at the end when it matters most.
You talk about Riders noise, Jeff. I got to come because I know you're so close to the situation. Like, their fans are starting to make a lot of noise. They're doing a lot of talking. They want Roland Milligan to be the MOP. All of a sudden they went from being real quiet to real loud, these Rider fans.
Well, they went from not winning games after Labor Day weekend to winning games after Labor Day weekend. And that, it's amazing, Bubba, what a fan base can feel when there's victories behind them. Yeah, absolutely. I love that the Riders made it interesting. It's, I do believe, a strong market there is obviously good for the CFL, and and we've seen in recent years that unless they're winning games, that market isn't as strong as maybe we think. But they are a sneaky team, as Joey said. I do think they're playing, they are playing their best football at the right time. They're collecting wins. They're feeling good about themselves. And it's just, for obviously with no skin in the game, all results make me happy. Like if the Bombers can beat the Riders again and create the misery to their prairie rivals, it's great to see. If the Riders can finally make it happen and get past the Bombers in the playoffs, that's great too. And under a head coach in Corey Mace, who's brought a lot of change, to that organization. But there's just something about those two teams, of course, when they play, throw the records out. But it's more than that. It's just there's something crazy that happens in the game. There's just something, whether it's a botched fumble like at the worst possible time or a kickoff return that makes the game suddenly interesting. It's just there's something about these two teams that make for great theater. So I know the league will likely be. It would be a great story for the Lions to play on home soil for the Grey Cup, but the CFL's hoping for that prairie rivalry in the West Final. There's no
Trevor Harris is getting prepared to go 63 of 65 with 2 throwaways for 110 yards.
Exactly for a 1 point
gonna average like 4.2 yards per pass, but he's gonna have 78 completions in whatever they end up playing, and we're all gonna look at it and be like, how did they lose? That doesn't make any sense.
It's always this Trevor Harris. The ball gets out of his head so quickly. It really is, guys. Hey, thank you so much, guys. You guys are spectacular. I love the chatter, the opinion. Just so solid about this week's topics. And boy, it really is. It's good to see that, and in some games where really even the ones that don't really mean a lot, they kind of do. So this is going to be a real fun final week of the Canadian Football League season. Jeff, guys want to chat with you about the Canadian Football League. How can they do so? Where can they do so?
You can reach me on Twitter at Jeff K. Hamilton. And you can email me. It's the bottom of all my stories. So if you make it to the end, thank you. And if you have a problem, that's where you can reach me.
Joey?
Hit me up on Instagram at Joey Slattery TV. It's the same for whatever it's called now. X Twitter. Yeah, hit me up there.
Twix.
Not going there. Not doing it.
I heard that on this show, I think, many weeks ago. Someone said Twix, and I was like, that makes sense.
Marsh?
You can find me at Jeff K. Hamilton.
I was just going to say, if you're trying to get a hold of me, throw your inquiries into the paper, the wastebasket. That's right.
I would suggest my Instagram, but it's just dogs, kids, and motorcycles. So don't go there. It's really not that interesting. I'm at TSN_Marsh, where I was, except when the TSN radio station got shut down in Hamilton, I immediately switched it to at CFL_Marsh, and somebody said, hey, you should probably go back because someone might steal TSN_Marsh and start posting things that acting as though they're you. I'm like, oh, that's a good point. I went back, lost my verification. So no blue check mark for me at TSN_Marsh because I gave up my handle for 20 minutes.
To be fair, though, everybody lost their verification unless you paid for it. I also lost my verification, but not because I switched anything. So don't worry, Marsh. It was nothing personal.
You guys needing your what do you call it? Your
My
confirm
badge?
your whatever. Yeah, I never went for it. We had opportunities at work. I just said no blue
It's a
check mark.
TV
I want to
thing.
fly under the radar.
It's a TV ego thing, Jeff. You just wouldn't.
Yeah, that's all it is, man.
Yeah, Marsh, TSA can't fess up the $15 a month for you? Come on now.
It's $15 a month to get verified?
I
It's
think
even more than I thought it was.
like that.
That is terrifying.
Hey, folks, let's keep the fandemonium of last Friday's home finale going on to the season finale as your Tiger Cats look to knock off the Redblacks at TD Place Stadium. All week, there will be local content to consume leading up to game day with Simone and Courtney, followed by the pregame show with Mike Daly and myself. All the fun kicking off Friday at 5:30 on the Tiger Cats Audio Network. Thanks once again to our outstanding panel. Thanks so much to you for checking into the CFL this week on the Tiger Cats Audio Network.